Hey everybody, what's up? My name is Jordan. If you know me through Twitch, you probably know me as I'm Your Man, and today we're going to start deck building with those new cards that just dropped yesterday. The Rising Tides expansion has opened up so many new deck building opportunities, and it's going to really allow us to go deep into the Legends of Runeterra metagame. That was a good pun. Today we're going to be looking at a going deep deck, pun literally not intended earlier, as we look at a Nautilus and Maokai deck. Maokai? Maokai. My Midwestern's really starting to show. Anyway, let's jump right in. Now that we're down here on the Decks of Runeterra landing page for the Nautilus Maokai Mill deck, I want to go through each card individually, because if you'll take a quick look at the screen, you'll see that 100% of these cards are from the new expansion. That means 0 cards from the base expansion, making it really difficult for maybe a new player to craft these things. So if you do want to play this, it's going to be a little expensive on your resources, but I think it'll be worth it, because I had a lot of fun playing this one. Anyway, because all of these cards are new, I want to go through them card by card a little bit and talk about the mechanics and then what the card actually does, so that we don't blaze by them. If we were doing a normal deck tech, I probably wouldn't tell you what Vile Feast does, but because all of these cards are new, I think it's really important that we go through them. The first card here is Maokai. Maokai is the namesake champion of the deck. When you flip or toss 25 cards this game, then he flips over and levels up. The backside of Maokai is he obliterates your opponent's entire deck, leaving 4 non-champion cards. This card is nuts. On its face, you'd think, well, how often am I going to flip or toss? How often am I going to toss, 25 cards or have 25 units die? I mean, I only have a 40 card deck, and I need this Maokai out on the table, and I need other cards to toss them. So really, I need to go deep. Going deep is very difficult here. Well, the cool thing about Maokai is that it flips way more often than you'd expect. This whole deck, as you will see as we go through, is completely geared towards flipping Maokai. And then the backside of Maokai is once you flip him, you just win the game. Obliterate your opponent's deck means you have two turns back and forth, 4 rounds, until you win due to decking. And it happened to me more than you'd think in the 10 or so games I play with this deck. I think I won 4 or 5 games to just the Maokai flip on its own. His buddy Nautilus is a little bit different of a win condition, but a win condition all the same. When he levels up, you copy all his hostile allies that cost 4 more back into your deck. So those are a free roll, because as you'll see, we have a lot of things that cost 4 or more in our deck, so they're kind of a free toss with Nautilus. And then when you're finally deep, which deep, if you're familiar or not familiar with the expansion, is when you have 15 or less cards in your deck, you are considered deep. You've gone deep, to use a card player term. The backside is all sea monster allies cost 4 or less, and he's a 13/13 with fearsome, and also tough, because the 13/13 needs tough. So the sea monster allies costing 4 or less actually came in pretty clutch a lot of the time and helped save me in some games that I otherwise would have lost. It allowed me to play a multiple 5/5s on a turn, and it kind of saved my bacon a little bit, not to mention having a 13/13. So again, Nautilus is a win gun. A little more traditional, a little less cool than Maokai, but a win condition all the same. The next card here is Dredgers. He just tosses 3. He doesn't care about your cards, just throws them right on out of there. He's an early enabler to get that toss mechanic going. You're not going to discriminate on when or why you toss with this deck. There's going to be very rarely when you have the opportunity to toss and don't want to. So being able to start the game on turn 1 with a toss 3 is very important. That's a 5th of the cards that you need to toss right out of the gate on the body of a 2/1 that can block early or get in for some early damage. So a key enabler card here. Bloom Wanderer, another kind of one of those card effects that when he comes into play, he's going to toss them, but he also has the benefit of being a lifelinker. So he's a Dredgers with lifelink, and that's really all he is. He's going to gain you some life. He's going to stall the ground. He's going to give you a chance to win against the aggro decks. One of the things we'll talk about is this deck does struggle a little bit against the hyper-aggressive decks, and cards like Bloom Wanderer really do more than their fair share of work in shoring up that difference. Jaw Hunters is the next card. When he's summoned, he creates a random sea monster, so he replaces himself immediately, and he also has Challenger. This deck has a lot of ways to deal with problematic creatures, but Challenger is another good way to do that. With vulnerable also being in this deck, you're actually not soft to elusives like I thought you would be. You're not soft to quick attack champions like you might think you are. You're not soft to aggro because you have these challenger and these vulnerability cards. So Jaw Hunter is not a sea monster, not a toss enabler, not a deep enabler, just an efficient card that helps you do your removal spells for you. Think he's the Laurent Prodigy of Demacia. Next card is Abyssal Eye. He's an elusive and he has deep. Deep, in case you aren't familiar with everything, is when you have this 15 or less cards that we talked about, it comes into play with +3/+3. He doesn't get it after you become deep if he's already in play, but if you play him while you're deep, he gets +3/+3. He's a 5-mana 3/3 elusive, and when he next strikes, he draws a card, so it's very likely he's going to replace himself, and if it comes down as a 6/6, you're loving life. This is another reason why you're not soft to elusives, because the 3 power attacks a lot of the elusive creatures very well. It trades up a lot of the time, and I think you're going to really like where Abyssal Eye comes down, because if you play a 5-mana 6/6 late in the game, you're probably going to win the game. Next card is Devourer of Depths. He's a 4/4 with deep. Again, if you have 15 or less cards when you cast him, he will come into play as a 7/7. And a play is an obliterate an enemy with less health than me. This card was an absolute all-star last night. Oh, your opponent plays something big with barrier. Like I ate a Lux for free because it was a 7/7. My opponent played a Lux that had barrier, and I followed up with Devourer of the Depths and just ate him up, baby sharked him up. So Devourer of the Depths is an efficient removal spell, because a lot of the times when I looked at this deck initially, I went, well, where's the removal? You know, it's kind of soft. Like, yeah, you have this lore that we'll talk about, but and then you get to Devourer of the Depths, and you're like, oh, that's fantastic. The worst I've ever felt playing this deck is when the Devourer of the Depths got tossed from the bottom of my graveyard. That felt really bad, but again, with Nautilus, you get to put them right back. So cards like Devourer of Depths are one of the main reasons to play this deck if you're into this kind of theme. Next card is Shipwreck Hoarder. When he's summoned, toss 2 and shuffle 2 treasures into your deck. The real reason that you're going to want to play this Shipwreck Hoarder is because it's a big body. It's a 10/8 when it's deep, and it enables all of your toss mechanics again. It's just another way to keep flipping those cards over into your obliterate pile. One of the cool things that'll end up working is the sea monster, and one of the things to think about this deck is there's a lot of sea monster synergies. As if you look over all the cards I'm scrolling over, well, not those 3, ignore those 3. All of these cards, they're sea monsters, and they interact well with some other cards that we'll talk about. So not only is he a big body that further enables your toss mechanic, he's also a sea monster. Next card is Terror of the Tides. It's got deep and it's a 6/5. When he attacks, you're going to give all enemies -2/-0 this round, and your sea monster allies have fearsome. This is a combo and a card. Again, like we just talked about, those sea monster effects, they're all going to get fearsome. And then guess what? When we attack, all of their guys are going to fall below 3 power. So we're going to be beaten unblockable a lot of the time. I won a lot of games last night where my opponents had this board of 3/3s or this board of 4Xs, and I just got to Terror of the Tides them and attack with all my fearsome guys, and they couldn't block and they were dead. This card is a good top-end finisher, kind of in that vein of like where Nautilus is like this big beefy finisher, right, as a 13/13. Your Terror of the Tides is a good, just big beefy finisher as well that makes it very difficult for your opponent to interact with you. Next cards we're going to look at are the spells. Jettison, it's a burst for a toss 4. This card does nothing other than, as you can tell, enable your toss mechanic and enable your ability to go deep. You use this card early, you can use this card late, whatever you want. This is a dead draw later in the game. Now, if you need to get to deep later in the game, or you need to flip your Maokai or your Nautilus, this is actually a great card to do it with. But if you're in a top deck war with your opponent, you really don't want to see Jettison. You've Been Warned is another one of those efficient removal spells that I was talking about, same way in the line of Jowl Hunters. You've Been Warned is a good way to get your opponent's pesky creatures out of the way. Give it vulnerable, and then it probably is going to replace itself, because you're likely not going to make something vulnerable that's not going to die. So, because then your creature would probably die and you'd 2 for 0 yourself. So if you warn a creature that you're going to kill, it's going to replace itself, and you've dealt with a problematic creature. This card is Lore of the Depths. I have in my notes written down that Lore of the Depths is an absolute all-star. 3 mana, it's going to reduce the cost of sea monsters everywhere, as it says, right? That instantly is going to pay for itself. And the fact that it then draws you a sea monster anyway, so not only does it reduce the cost of sea monsters and make itself free, it also draws a card so it replaces itself. Next card is Riptide. Now, this is a good stall the game card, and if you do have the Nautilus out, it acts as a foe removal spell. 4 mana, and it's fast, so you can play it in combat when you see what your opponent's attacking with or how he's going to block. This card is not necessarily a card that's going to win you the game, but it's going to prevent you from losing a lot of the time. It's going to stall the game out. One of the problems that we have with this deck is that the deck is quite expensive. We don't even have a 4-drop. We jump from 3 to 5 on the creature scale here. We have a couple of 4 spells to bridge the gap, but we go from 1 to 3 to 7 basically is what the curve kind of looks like. So it gets really fast. If you're playing against like the Drinks Draven deck, you're going to have a hard time interacting. So these Riptides are going to be really efficient for keeping your life total nice and high, so you can get to your Devourer of Depth, so you can get to your Shipwreck Quarter, so you can get to your Abyssal Eyes. Final card on the list is Salvage. Has burst, and it is tossed you a draw 2. Now, unlike Jettison, where you don't want to see this card in a top deck war, Salvage is a card you want to see in a top deck war. Going through 4 cards that late in the game is going to be an absolute house when it comes to your top deck wars. Your opponent's drawing 1 card a turn, and you're going to draw 3 this turn that you have Salvage, and likely it's going to be a card that cares about the tosses that you just did. So it's going to be efficient. Anyway, so that's the card breakdown. If you missed anything, go back and watch that part of the video, or look the cards up on Decks of Runeterra or Mobilytics or something like that, and check them out. That way you can kind of understand how it works. Now we're going to go into another section where I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the deck played and break it down a little bit more. One of the things that I mentioned briefly was that Maokai flips way more often than you'd think, and it's a way more first condition win condition than I originally thought it was going to be. I thought I'd cheese a couple of games with Maokai. I thought the Saplings, which are right here, by the way. Well, I thought the Saplings were going to be some keep me alive effects, but in reality, the Maokai flip of exiling your opponent's deck all the way down to 4 cards was an absolute game winner way more often than I think I said 40% of the games that I played yesterday came down to me flipping the Maokai in games that I wasn't going to win anyway. So with that in mind, we have to talk about how you have to play this deck. In every card game matchup, there's the aggressive player, and then there's the control player. And figuring out who you are in that role is one of the most important things to determine if you're going to lose or win or not. If you think of Maokai as a first win condition, that greatly changes how you play the game. I attacked a lot less often with this deck the more I played it, as I understood that the end game for this deck isn't getting in with your Dreadbloom Wanderers, your Jaw Hunters, or even just your Abyssal Eyes on 5 right away. The deal is waiting until your deep cards can take effect. Wait till you flip a Nautilus, wait till you flip a Maokai before you really start to turn the corner. A Devourer of Depths is when you really start to turn the corner with a deep Devourer of Depths. A 7/7 is going to kill basically anything on its own, and then this coming into play effect's also going to kill basically anything on its own. I obliterated a Commander of Ledras. You know how good that feels? I'll tell you, it feels pretty good. It feels pretty good. And that's when those corners can start to turn, is when you play these 6 drops, these 7 drops, these 8 drops. So slow off the gas a little bit, tap on that brake pad. Imagine there's a cop up in front of you, just slow it down a little bit. That's what you got to do with this deck. You don't want to attack much at all. The final tip that I have for this Nautilus Maokai deck is that you're going to play a little bit of a Sea Monsters tribal theme. Your Terror of the Tides that give Sea Monsters fearsome. Terror of the Tides? Tides of the... I can't say that. Tides of the Terror? Tods? Tide Pod? Whatever. Your Terror of the Tides that gives Sea Monsters allies fearsome. And look at this. You have 3, 6, 9, 10 Sea Monsters in your deck. And then in your Nautilus, which also makes all of your Sea Monster allies cost 4 or less, you are playing to this tribal theme. And even though I think this deck is good, and I won, I think, 90% of the games that I played with it last night, playing with Sea Monsters is also like a really cool deck style, and it kind of sounds like a euphemism. Anyway, that's not really the most important thing, other than I think that's a nice small sub-theme you can play around, and you can kind of create some advantage for yourself that way by maximizing the ability of these cards that care about Sea Monsters. Anyway, that's all for this week's deck. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you take out this Nautilus Maokai deck out to the ladder and start ranking up. If you have any questions about the deck, or if you want to see it more in action, I stream on Twitch every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also, you're going to find the deck code for this deck so that you can pop it right into your Legends of Runeterra client. And if you like the video, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. I do a video every week as well. Anyway, thanks, and have a great day.